Good evening, class. This is your lecture for Chapter 2, Essential Requisites of Contracts. So before we begin with the essential requisites, we must first discuss the elements of a contract. So there are actually three elements of a contract. Number one are your essential elements. So remember, essential elements are elements without which a contract will not exist. That's why they are called essential elements, because they are absolutely necessary for the existence of a contract. There are two kinds of essential elements: your common essential elements, and number two, your special essential elements. So your common essential elements, cause, object, and consent, we will discuss extensively later on. And also yung special naman, they are, remember, peculiar or unique to certain types of contracts. So remember, an example of a contract which has a special essential element are real contracts. So remember, real contracts are perfected by mere delivery. So you deliver the object, the contract is perfected. If you do not deliver the object, an example of a real contract is a contract of pledge. So pledge or sangla. So remember, ang pledge or sangla, hindi mapaperfect yan until and unless you deliver the object na sinasangla mo. That's why it is called a real contract, because remember, it is perfected by delivery. Wala naman siguro kayong nakitang nagsangla na hindi dineliver yung object na sinangla sa isang pledge. So remember, in case of pledge, a real contract, there is a special essential element, which is delivery. So in addition to the common essential elements, cause, object, and consent, in case of essential contracts, in case of real contracts, meron siyang additional element, which is a special essential element, delivery. Cause, object, consent, and number 4, delivery. So remember yung essential elements. How about natural elements? In case of natural elements, kapag pinag-usapan, nandyan. Kapag hindi pinag-usapan, nandyan pa rin. Bakit? Because remember, natural elements, they are presumed to exist in certain contracts unless the contrary is stipulated. So, paano mo sila tatanggalin? If it is stipulated na haalisin. So, let us take an example of a contract with natural elements. Contract of sale, it has natural elements. Yung mga warranties are natural elements of a contract of sale. So let us say meron kang binenta, bahay at lupa. So a natural element is your warranty against eviction. Siguro alam niyo naman yung eviction, di ba? Yun yung sa bahay ni kuya, pagka pinalayas ka, evicted. So, in a contract of sale, merong warranty ang seller na hindi mapapalayas ang buyer doon sa property na binenta niya. Now, if ikaw ang buyer, napalayas ka sa property na ibinenta sa'yo, the seller, in fact, violated yung warranty against eviction. So, remember here, class, na yung element na yon, warranty, is a natural element. Nandun siya sa lahat ng contract of sale. It is incorporated by law. Now, how will you remove the warranties? It must be expressly stipulated that the warranties will be removed from the agreement or contract. So, remember, natural elements. What else? Accidental elements. Kapag pinag-usapan, nandyan. Kung hindi pinag-usapan, wala. Remember, so in case of accidental elements, the best example is your stipulation to pay interest. So, nangutang si debtor kay creditor, merong stipulation na magbabayad ng interest. If the interest is in writing, may pinag-usapan, it is in writing, pwedeng maningil ng interest si creditor. So, remember, this is an accidental element. Paano kung hindi pinag-usapan ng interest? Hindi pwedeng maningil si creditor ng interest. So, also remember, the rule for interest to be due and demandable, it should be in writing. If the interest is not in writing, remember, hindi ka pwedeng maningil ng interest even if pinag-usapan. Even if aminado ang debtor na may interest ang utang, but if it is not written, remember that there is no interest that can be due. What else? So also, That's it. So anyway, remember, essential, absolutely necessary for a contract. Natural, pinag-usapan or hindi, nandyan, para mawala, pag-usapang alisin. Accidental, pinag-usapan or hindi, pinag-usapan, nandyan, hindi pinag-usapan, wala. So also, take note of the common essential elements, consent, object, and cause. So let's begin with consent. So remember, consent is covered by Article 1319, conformity or concurrence of wills. So, paano nagkakaroon ng conformity or concurrence of wills? Pagka nagtagpo ang offer and acceptance. Offer, acceptance. Nagtagpo sila, yan ay consent. So, remember, conformity or concurrence of wills. Tuwang-tuwa daw ako dun, ano? Anyway, ano ang napapag-agrihan nila? Object of the contract, terms of the contract. They agree with respect to the cost also of the contract. So, remember, pagka nag-meet yung dalawang yan, nagkakaroon ng consent. So, obviously, in consent, kailangan sa contract may dalawang parties kasi hindi pwedeng mag-meet yung offer and acceptance if there is no plurality of parties. So, yun ang kailangan nating tandaan. Also, general rule, capacity to give consent is presumed. Anyway, we will discuss that later on more. So, anyway, sabi ko, ang consent nangyayari kung merong meeting ng offer and acceptance. So, the rules in offer and acceptance, I will discuss one by one. In 1319, sabi, offer must be certain. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Pagka nag-offer ka ng object, let us say it's a contract of sale. So, you are the seller. You are the offerer because you are making the offer. Kung halimbawa nagbebenta ka ng sasakyan, 10 ang sasakyan mo, dapat sigurado ka kung ano ang binebenta mo, which one you are trying to sell, and for how much. That will make your offer certain. Kasi hindi ka pwedeng mag-offer ng hindi mo alam kung ano yung ino-offer mo. Paano naman tatanggapin ng buyer yan? Who is the offeree? Kasi hindi naman niya alam kung alin ang binebenta mo at kung magkano. So remember, the offer must be certain. Yun ang pinaka-tandaan nyo. So dapat fix ang liability and rights para makapagbigay ng acceptance yung offeree. So what else? 1321, the offer may fix the time, place, and manner of acceptance. So, the offerer can designate how the offeree will accept the offer, the time, and the place to accept it. So, let us say I'm selling to you my car, 500,000. So, that is a certain offer. My car, isa lang ang sasakyan ko, 500,000, fixed price. So, that is a certain offer. Now, I can fix also the manner of acceptance or the time of acceptance, place. So, I tell you, accept my offer in 5 days via email, via text. So, remember, yung offerer is allowed to do so, to fix the circumstances of acceptance. And on the other hand, the offeree must comply with the time, place, and manner of acceptance na sinet ng offerer. So, yun ang 1321. What else? 1322. Offer made through an agent. So, an offer may be made through an agent, remember. So, ang agent is a representative of somebody else called the principal. Sometimes, your agent is also known as your attorney in fact. Hindi siya totoong attorney. Representative siya. But the law calls them attorney in fact. They represent somebody else who is usually known as the principal or grantor. So, remember, dahil nga ang isang principal or grantor is represented by agent, parang extension ng personality nila yan. So, yung offer may be made through an agent. And also, remember that on the other hand, sa part ng offeree, if the offer is made by an agent, the acceptance of the offeree must also be communicated through an agent. Yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. What else? 1323, an offer will become ineffective upon the death, civil interdiction, insanity, or insolvency of either party before acceptance is communicated. So, several terms: death, civil interdiction, insanity, or insolvency. So, I make an offer. I'm the offerer. Car, 500,000, certain offer. In-offer kita. Pagka-offer ko sa'yo, hindi mo pa natatanggap, namatay ako. So, remember here, class, that the offer will become ineffective because of my death. Same rule with insanity. Huli na natin yung civil interdiction. In insanity, pagka-offer ko sa'yo, specific, certain offer, and then ikaw, bago mo tanggapin, nabaliw ka, offer is ineffective. Same rule with insolvency. So, if either of us namatay, nabaliw, naging insolvent, or bankrupt, remember, the offer becomes ineffective. How about civil interdiction? So, remember, civil interdiction is also known as civil death. So, in civil interdiction, nawawalan ka ng, it's a penalty wherein nawawalan ka ng civil rights. So, if nawalan ka ng civil rights, you can no longer enter into contracts. Actually, sa pagka-civil interdiction, ang pwede mo na lang gawin is to make a last will and testament. That's it. Dahil wala ka na ng civil rights. So, kailan nagkakaroon ng civil interdiction? There is civil interdiction dahil sabi ko nga sa inyo, penalty siya. It is an accessory penalty. So, there is a principal kasi may accessory. So, may principal penalty. The principal penalty here is imprisonment. So, nakulong ka. Bakit ka nakulong? Because you committed a crime. And number 2, very importantly, you are convicted of that crime. Guilty ka. So, meron kang penalty. The principal penalty is imprisonment. And the accessory penalty is civil interdiction or the suspension of civil rights. Sometimes known as civil death. So, question. Nag-violate ka ng curfew, dinampot ka ng mga pulis, umuwi ka ng, let us say, 9:30. Dinala ka ng pulis sa Conacor, sa may Conacor, tapos kinulong ka nila. Question. Meron ka na bang civil interdiction? Ay, ako rin pala yung sasagot ng question. Kasi nga, ako lang pala. So anyway, ang sagot nyo, yes, ma'am, sir. Kasi nakulong ka na. So, meron ng civil interdiction. Siyempre, mali. Bakit? Because, again, remember, in case of civil interdiction, it will apply only if you are convicted. Nadampot ka pa lang, kinulong ka pa lang, hindi ka pa naman nakasuhan, hindi ka pa naman nasintensyahan. So, remember here, class, that there is no civil interdiction as yet because hindi ka pa nasintensyahan, you are not yet found guilty. Because, believe it or not, class, may mga nakakulong na hindi pa nasisintensyahan. They are called your detention prisoners. So, detention prisoners, nakakulong sila, number 1, because their offense is non-bailable. Hindi sila makapagpiyansa. Kahit marami silang pera, the offense is non-bailable. Like in the case of rape, hindi ka pwedeng magpiyansa dun. So, kung 10 years ang hearing, 10 years ka rin nakakulong. So, anyway, nakakatuwa, no? So, yan ang detention prisoner na isa. Or number 2, your offense is bailable, but you do not have the money to post bail. Wala kang pampiyansa. So, remember, kung wala kang pampiyansa, nakakulong ka. Kasi nga, you cannot pay for your provisional liberty. So, again, itong mga detention prisoners, meron pa silang civil rights because hindi pa naman sila nasintensyahan. Anyway, I make an offer, tapos bigla nahatulan ako guilty of murder. My offer to you becomes ineffective because of my civil death dahil nga ako ay guilty. So anyway, remember 1323, 1324, offer may be withdrawn at any time before acceptance. I offer to you my car. Tapos ikaw naman hindi ka pa makapag-decide kaagad. Medyo magulong isip mo. Kailangan mo ng time. Yan, time. So, anyway, maghihintay ka. Maghihintay ako. Tapos, sige, sabi ko, bigyan kita ng 5 days. Kasi nakita ko medyo maganda ka. So, 5 days. Bigyan kita ng 5 days to decide yung offer ko. Ikaw na offeree, sige, tinanggap mo yung 5 days. Later on, without waiting for the 5-day period to expire, ay, sakto, may nakita ako. Mas maganda sa'yo. Tapos, she's willing to buy my car right now. Can I sell my car to that other person without waiting for the expiration of 5 days? Yes. Why? Because remember, the offer, as a general rule, may be withdrawn at any time before acceptance. So, 1324 here is actually the general rule. Now, of course, if there's a general rule, hulaan nyo kung anong meron. Exceptions. Yes, of course, there are exceptions to general rules. So, what is the exception? In case the offer is in case the option here is paid with consideration. So anyway, remember sa isang contract, pagka binigyan kita ng 5 days, we actually enter into an option contract. You have an option to buy it. Binigyan kita ng period na 5 days. So, that is the option period. Kaya, meron tayong option contract. But, because yung option period ay hindi binayaran, remember, I can withdraw it at any time. So, paano kung binayaran mo yung option period? Ang tawag sa binayad mo sa option period ay option money. So, remember, pagka binayaran mo yung period, I cannot withdraw it until the expiration of the option period. So, yung option contract natin is covered by a consideration, which is the option money. Example again, car, 500,000, 5 days to decide. Tapos, ikaw naman, dahil ikaw ay maganda at very considerate also, sige, para sa paghihintay ko na 5 days, dahil maaabala nga naman ako, binigyan mo ko ng 5,000 pesos. Eh, di ang saya ko. So anyway, yung binayad mo sa akin, 5,000 pesos is called your option money. What did you pay for? The option period of 5 days. Ngayon may nakita ko, mas maganda talaga sa'yo ng sobra-sobra. Can I sell the car without waiting for the option period to expire? No. Why? Because binayaran mo yung period. So remember the rule. Now, after 5 days, di ba may option contract tayo? After 5 days, na pag-isipan mo na bilhin yung sasakyan. Question. Which I will answer also as well later. So, question. Magkano ang ibabayad mo the moment that you decide to purchase the car? Is it letter A, 500,000 pesos? Or is it letter B, 495,000 pesos. Hindi ako accountant, no? So, mahina ako sa math. Pero, hindi ko naman ginamitan ng calculator yon. Kasi, kayo, alam ko, kayo ay nagka-calculator pa para sa 1 plus 1. I'm pretty sure ginagawa niyo yon dahil sanay na ako sa inyong mga accountancy students. So, anyway, 495,000 letter B. The answer is, hulaan nyo, remember, the answer is letter A, 500,000 pesos. Siyempre, nagtaas kayo ng kamay. Ma'am/sir, sabi mo ganyan. Bakit? Sabi ko naman, paano po yung binayad namin na 5,000 pesos? Yes, nagbayad kayo ng 5,000 pesos. Pero natatandaan nyo ba kung anong binayaran nyo? Oo, ang binayaran nyo ay yung option period. So, that is option money you used to pay for the option period. Hindi nyo binayaran yung purchase price, class. Ang binayaran nyo ay yung period na maghihintay ako. So, remember, your option contract, which is paid for by option money, na nagbibigay sa inyo ng option period. What about earnest money? By the way, class, obviously, in option contracts na mayroong option money para sa option period, the contract is not yet perfected. Why? Kasi pag-iisipan mo pa lang yung offer kung tatanggapin mo or hindi. So, yun ang tandaan natin sa option contract. In option money versus earnest money, ano naman yung earnest money? Yung earnest money or ARAS, ARRAS, they are, yung earnest money is paid to as part of the purchase price. So, usually, better known as your down payment. Kaya nga siya earnest money. You want to show the seller that you are really interested in buying yung kanyang property. And in some books, ang definition niya is, it is paid to bind the bargain. So, yung earnest money will signify perfection of the contract already. Kasi hindi ka naman magda-down payment kung ayaw mong bilhin yung binibenta niya. So, remember, in case of our problem, what if yung 5,000, it is not option money, but instead it is earnest money. Now, later on, magkano ang babayaran mo? Is it B, 495 or A, 500? You will pay, remember, B, 495. Why? Because remember, ARAS already part of the purchase price. Para pakita mo na really gusto mo yung tinatanggap mo yung offer. So remember, in case of earnest money, the contract is already perfected. So part of the purchase price. What else do you have to remember? Business advertisements are not definite offers. So ito yung mga nakikita nyong house and lot for sale. So general rule, not definite offers. Why? House and lot for sale. Paano ka makakapag-decide kung bibilin mo yun or hindi? Hindi mo nga alam kung nasan yung house at saka yung lot. So, there are no particulars. What if your business advertisement is complete in all material particulars? Let us say, may price, may location, dinescribe yung bahay, yung lupa, mayroong area, bungalow, land is 500 square meters, ang area ng bahay is 300, so meron kang garden and backyard around 200 square meters, tapos ang area niya, number 1, Champaca Street, Barangay San Vicente, Tarlac City, tapos ang price niya is 1 million pesos, tapos fixed price, payable in cash, sinabi pa kung paano ang bayad tapos meron pang contact person, contact number, remember, if the advertisement is complete in material particulars, it is a definite offer. Paano mo malalaman kung definite yung offer and if it is complete in material particulars? Just based on the offer, as a buyer, you can decide whether or not you want to buy yung property. So that is, remember, business advertisement complete in material particulars, that is a definite offer. But as a general rule, business advertisements are not definite offers. What else? Advertisement for bidders are, again, not definite offers. Because ang advertisement for bidders, naghahanap sila ng magbibid para sa isang bagay. So, let us say, class, naghahanap ako ng magbibid para sa binibenta kong tablet. Yan. iPad, tablet, anyway, hindi ko sasabihin kung anong pin code ko. So, nagpapabid ako dito. So, I'm an advertiser para dun sa bid. I advertise. I'm looking for bidders. Now, sa auction, alam niyo naman siguro yung auction, yun yung may hammer, tapos humahanap sila ng mga bid, ganyan. Tapos, pagka wala nang makatalo dun sa price, ine-end na nila. Nagfo-fall na yung hammer, tapos ending na ng auction. So, anyway, sa isang auction or bidding, actually, ako na advertiser ng bid, in-advertise ko na ipapabid ko to. I am the offeree, remember. And kayo na magbibid, you are the offerers. So, you offer to me a price. Let us say for this tablet, 50,000 pesos. So, that is your bid. Later on, yung katabi nyo, nagbid siya, 60,000 pesos para dito. So, remember that in case of bidding, syempre, kung nagbebenta ako, I'm an advertiser, I want the highest price. So, yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. Ang advertisement for bidders, dahil naghahanap ako ng bidders, hindi siya definite offer. Kasi nga ako yung offeree. Kayo ng mga bidders, kayo ang offerer. So, kayo ang nagbibigay ng offer sa akin. So, yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. Also, in auction, nasa sales na to, no? Pero dahil wala namang nakapagturo ng sales, kahit gaano kagaling pa yung prof ninyo, I'm sure hindi niya naturo yung sales. 100 million%, hindi niya naturo yung sales. In case of auctions, remember that the advertiser is not bound to accept the highest or the lowest bid. Yun ang general rule. Except if it is specified in the advertisement that the advertiser will accept the highest or the lowest bid. Siyempre, may tanong kayo. Ma'am/sir, bakit po may lowest bid? Di ba po ang bidding pataasan? Not really. If you're trying to sell, like this one, you will look for the highest bid. But what if you're trying to hire a construction company to construct your house? Obviously, you are trying to get the lowest bid. So remember, but again, the advertiser is not bound to accept the highest or the lowest bid. So that is what you have to remember about auctions. Also, remember that auctions, they are perfected by the fall of the hammer. Kaya nga yun ang example na sinabi ko, diba? 50,000, sabi ni A. 60,000, sabi ni B. Sabi ni C, 80,000. Sabi ni D, 100,000 pesos. So, yun ang, tapos after nun, wala nang makatalo nung ano. Siyempre, nagbibilang na yung auctioneer. Going once, going twice, tapos ano sabi niya? Ipupukpok niya yung hammer, and that will signify perfection of the contract. Or, in some other customary manner na nakasanayan na, kaya nga customary. Kasi, if you watch History Channel, they have these shows na nagbibid sila for storage lockers. Walang hammer doon. So, obviously, they perfect the contract in another customary manner. So, yun ang tandaan natin sa auctions. Meron pa akong natandaan. Question, can the advertiser bid sa sariling auction niya? Bakit niya gagawin yun? Siyempre, para tumaas yung price. Actually, pwede. Pwede siyang mag-bid sa sarili niyang auction as long as it is advertised that he will be bidding. Also, remember that the advertiser can hire third persons to bid on his behalf. Ang tawag sa kanila ay buy bidders or puffers, BY-BIDVERS and PUFFERS. So, pwede yon as long as it is stated in the advertisement for bidders that the advertiser will bid, or buy bidders or puffers will bid on his behalf, just to jack up the prices para tumaas. So, anyway, also we have to discuss acceptance. Sabi ko nga sa inyo, offer and acceptance. Kailangan nilang mag-meet. Offer, acceptance. Consent. So, remember, in acceptance, what you have to remember is that acceptance must be absolute in 1319. So, this is the second part of 1319. So, if the offer is certain, dapat ang acceptance also is absolute. What does it mean for acceptance to be absolute? So, acceptance is absolute if tinanggap ng offeree yung offer ng buong buo. If the offeree does not try to change any of the terms of the offer, the acceptance then is considered absolute. So, remember, kung ano yung offer, walang papalitan ang offeree. Tatanggapin niya ng buong buo. What if the offeree, pinalitan niya yung terms ng offer? Remember, that is a counter offer. Ibig sabihin, he rejects the original offer and makes a new offer in lieu of the rejected offer. So, 500,000 car, yan ang offer, certain. Itong si buyer, offeree, sabi niya, gusto kong bilhin, but for 300,000 only. So, binago niya yung term ng offer. So, here, the offer is certain, but the acceptance is not absolute. Tinawaran niya eh. So, ngayon, because the acceptance is not absolute, remember that it is a counter offer. A counter offer is actually a new offer. So, nagpapalit ng roles yan. The offeree is now an offerer, and yung seller, who was the former offerer, is now an offeree. So, obviously, itong si seller, pagka tinawaran ng ganun, siyempre, ikaw naman, 300,000, ayaw niya yan. So, again, let us say the offerer, sabi niya, or seller, sabi niya, who is now the offeree, 450,000. So, again, it is a rejection of the counter offer of the buyer. And again, dahil siya ay counter offer na naman, it is actually a new offer. So, yun ang kailangan nating tandaan. Offer, counter offer. Also, remember, in case of acceptance by letter, ang acceptance by letter is effective from the time that the acceptance is communicated or known to the offerer. So, offerer, nagbigay ako ng offer sa offeree, sumulat ako, tapos nabasa ng offeree. Pagkabasa niya ng sulat ko, tinatanggap na niya yung aking offer. Pero, kasi ang manner ng acceptance na ginawa ko is by letter. So, the offeree should write to me. So, itong offeree, sumulat siya. Question. Hindi mo na ako magko-question. Sumulat si offeree, tapos, tinanggap ko kinabukasan. So, question. Kailan nagkaroon ng perfected contract? Nung bang time na tinanggap niya kahapon? Nung gusto na niya yung offer? Tapos, or yung time na natanggap ko yung sulat. So, remember, the offer is accepted or the contract is perfected in this case nung time na natanggap ko yung sulat. So, remember, the acceptance here of the letter may be actual or constructive. So, yung acceptance by correspondence, remember, at the time the acceptance has come to the knowledge of the offerer. That is the only time it is perfected. Constructive or actual. Actually, natanggap ko yung sulat, yun ay actual knowledge or constructive knowledge. Sinabi sa akin na nandiyan na yung acceptance letter. That is constructive knowledge. But remember here that the acceptance is effective only upon the time na nalaman ng offerer yung acceptance of the offeree. Dun pa lang siya perfected. What else? How about Article 1320? Acceptance may be expressed or implied. No need to explain. Pwede namang i-accept mo vocally that you are, say na tinatanggap mo yung offer. And in 1320, also, acceptance may be implied. So, tandaan nyo na in case of 1320, yung acceptance niyo by actions. Yan. How about the next article, 1321? Acceptance must also comply with the terms of the offer. Remember, in 1321, the offer may fix the time, place, and manner of acceptance. So, again, in case of 1321, the offeree should comply with the terms na sinet out by the offerer. And lastly, 1322, acceptance must be communicated to the agent who made the offer. Because remember, again, in 1322, sabi, offer may be made through an agent. Walang problema yan. Diniscuss ko na kanina. But remember also that the acceptance must be communicated to the agent who made the offer. So, our next topic will be 1327. Remember the general rule a while ago? It is presumed that a person can give consent. So, yun ang basic presumption. Kasi in our law, we did not define kung sino ang pwedeng magbigay ng consent. But what the law did is to define the persons who are not capable of giving consent. So, according to 1327, who are the persons who cannot give consent? Minors, obviously. Ano yung minor? 17 and below, or below 18. Bahala na kayo dyan. What else? Insane or demented. Mga baliw na tao. Kilala nyo yan. parang tayo na lahat yan. And also, deaf mutes who do not know how to write. Why deaf mutes? Ano ba yung deaf mutes? Pipi na, bingi pa. Bakit? Because remember, all of these, actually, all of them, they are, they can be easily victims of fraud. Madali silang lokohin. Remember, minors cannot give intelligent consent. Obviously, the insane or demented, sira ulo nga, di ba? And also, deaf mutes, mas madali silang maloko. Kasi, kung hindi ka marunong magsulat, obviously, hindi ka marunong magbasa. So, ngayon, pagka deaf mute ka, hindi mo mabasa yung terms ng contract. So, mahirap magbigay ng consent. So, anyway, remember, in case of 1327, contracts entered into by minors, insane, or demented persons or deaf mutes who do not know how to write, they are actually general rule voidable contracts. But later on, you will also realize that they may also be classified as unenforceable, depending. So anyway, ma'am, paano po kung marunong magsulat yung deaf mute? Obviously, they are removed from the enumeration of persons who cannot give consent. So, dahil nga naman nakakapagsulat sila, obviously, nakakabasa sila. And they will understand yung mga terms ng contract. So, yun ang tandaan natin in 1327. In 1328, this will talk about, 1329, I mean, this will talk about modifications on incapacity. So, sabi sa 1327, yung three mentioned cannot give intelligent consent. In 1329, meron tayong certain modifications when pwede silang magbigay ng consent. Ang binigay ko lang 3, but there are several in your book. Kayo na lang bahalang tumingin dyan. College na kayo, kaya nyo na yan. Necessaries, obviously, pagka bumili kayo ng pagkain, kahit minor ka, you have to pay for the price. What else? If the contract is entered into by a guardian or a legal representative, as long as the guardian or legal representative is authorized, remember that the contract is also valid. What else? Also, in case of contract where the minor misrepresented his age, so remember, this is based on the doctrine of estoppel, E-S-T-O-P-P-E-L. So, tinuro ko na yan sa mga estudyante ko dati. Hopefully, tinuro din sa inyo ng prof ninyo sa RFBT. So, please take note of the definition of estoppel. We will also encounter that when we go to partnerships. What else? Also, remember 1327 in case of lucid interval. So, in lucid interval, sabi, temporary period of sanity. So, obviously, in case of lucid interval, araw-araw baliw ka. One day, gumising ka at matino ang pag-iisip mo. Anong tawag doon? That is called lucid interval. So, now, in case of lucid interval, what is the status of your contract? Pagka ikaw ay pumasok sa contract at the time of your lucid interval. Remember, your contract is remember, valid. Yan. Basta, it can be shown that there is full return of the mind to sanity. So, araw-araw baliw ka. One day, ay, hindi na ako baliw. You entered into a contract. The contract that you entered into is valid. Now, question number 102. Ma'am/sir, kinabukasan na baliw uli. Question, what is the status of the contract entered into yesterday during the lucid interval? Still valid. The reckoning point is at the time you entered into the contract. Ano ka ba nun? Baliw ka ba nun? Etc. May lucid interval ka ba nun? Etc. So, that is the reckoning point. So, remember, 1328. How about, also included, 1328 pa rin pala, drunkenness and hypnotic spell. Pumasok ka sa contract in case medyo lasing ka, parang ako lang yan. And also, hypnotic spell, na budol-budol ka, na hypnotize ka. What is the status of your contract? Remember, wala pang sagot, ano? Excited kayo. Pero obviously, drunkenness and hypnotic spell will impair the capacity of a person to give, again, intelligent consent. Binasa ko lang yun. What else? So, again, contract is, remember, voidable because this is temporary insanity. Katulad nung sinabi ko, persons who cannot give consent, minors, demented, and deaf mutes who do not know how to write. So, yun ang kailangan tandaan. Pagka laseng, voidable. Now, by the way, class, what is a voidable contract? A voidable contract is a contract which is valid until it is annulled. Voidable. So, kaya nga voidable there is a possibility of invalidating the contract. So, yun ang tandaan natin sa 1328. What else? Vices of consent, VIMFO, remember? V, violence, I, intimidation, M, mistake, F, fraud, and U, undue influence. So, let's enumerate them one by one. Again, mistake, provisions covering it, violence or force. Binilagay ko na rin yung mga synonyms para hindi na kayo mahirapan. So, intimidation, threat, duress, undue influence, and fraud or deceit. Also, remember class, your Latin terms. I will try to incorporate them as much as possible to the lectures, but memorize your Latin terms. When you go to your review centers, they will give you a 4-page list of Latin terms. Now, if you do not start memorizing now, sigurado ako mahihirapan kayo sa board exam. So, memorizing yung mga Latin terms. Minsan kasi yung bawa, di natin alam yung trip nila, di ba? So, remember, VIMFO. So, let's take the first one, a mistake under Article 1331. Wait lang, titingnan ko yung, ayan. So, remember in 1331, mistake, ang kailangan yung tandaan, this is a false notion or belief about a thing, fact, material to the contract. So, what is the effect if there is mistake in a contract? The contract is voidable. Yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. So, here, mistake should be substantial mistake of fact. Yun ang kailangan yung tandaan sa mistake. So, the mistake may refer to the substance of an object, to the conditions which move the parties to enter into the contract, or the identity or qualifications of the parties into the contract. So, ang kailangan yung tandaan, substance, in case of mistake as to substance of the object, pumirma ka ng kontrata, akala mo nangungutang ka lang, yung pala, pinipirmahan mo pala is a contract of sale. Akala mo pinipirmahan mo utang, tapos sinangla mo yung property mo. So, later on you found out that what you signed is a deed of sale over your property. So, that is mistake as to the substance of the thing. How about number 2, conditions, error in boundaries. Akala mo ito ang binibili mong lupa, tapos yung pala hindi naman yan ang boundaries. So, had you known na iba yung boundaries, hindi mo siya bibilin. So, remember, sa mistake in 1331, kung alam mo na nagkamali ka, hindi mo bibilin yung property, hindi ka papasok sa contract. And number 3, mistake as to identity. So, the example in your book is very precise. Nag-donate ka ng kotse to your brother, to a person, thinking that he is your half-brother. Later on, nalaman mo na hindi pala kayo related. So here, had you known na hindi mo siya half-brother, you wouldn't have donated yung car. So here, this is a mistake in identity. So yun ang kailangan nating tandaan. Also, mistake of account will only give rise to corrections. In 1332, siguro, person who alleges mistake must prove that there is in fact mistake committed. Pero kung ang kausap ninyo is a person who is ignorant, and the ignorant person claims mistake, you have to establish that you already explained ng mabuti sa kanya yung contract na pinasukan niya, especially if the contract is not in a language which is understood by him. So, pagka nakikipagkontrata kayo sa hindi nakapag-aral, tapos sinabi niya na, hindi ko alam, nagkamali, akala ko ganito, it's your burden of proof, kasi ikaw yung nag-aral. napatunayan na inexplain mo sa kanya yung kontrata, and at the time of signing, he understood the contents of the contract. So, lesson here is, do not contract with a person who does not understand very well, or at least explain mo mabuti. What else? 1333, if you are aware of the knowledge, if you have knowledge of the risk, this is not a mistake. So, kung alam mo na kaduda-duda, still you took a risk, so this is not mistake. Bumili ka ng ballpen. Sabi nung seller, sumusulat ito sa ilalim ng tubig, ilalim ng dagat, sabi mo na. Nag-swimming ka sa Boracay, trinay mo. Siyempre, hindi susulat yung ballpen. Sign pen, sabihin na natin para mas makatotohanan. Sign pen yan. And, obviously, wala rin namang papel na pwede kang masulatan sa ilalim ng dagat. So, here, obviously, when you buy it, alam mo na yung risk. And, diet pills. Papayat ka in 3 days. Lose 10 kilos in 3 days. Obviously, pagka binili mo yan, tanga ka. Obviously, pag binili mo yan, binobola ka lang. Because it's impossible. Now, if you buy it, you know the risk. So, this is not mistake. What else? 1334, mutual error as to the effects of an agreement can also invalidate consent. But remember, the error must be mutual, and it must be with respect to the legal effects of a contract, and it must frustrate the intention of the parties. What else? Also, violence under Article 1335. Keywords: serious or irresistible force. Yan, physical force. And the force must be either serious or irresistible. Hindi mo siya ma-overcome. Hindi mo malabanan yung puwersa. Kailangan ba masakit? Hindi naman. Basta hindi mo lang malabanan. Lagi kong ine-example sa mga estudyante ko to Tinali ka ng mga friends mo. Tapos pagkatali nila sa'yo, kiniliti ka nila ng kiniliti. Hindi sila titigil hanggat hindi mo pinirmahan yung contract. So, nasaktan ka ba? Hindi, di ba? Pero remember here that even if tuwang-tuwa ka, there is violence. Why? Because the force is serious or irresistible. Or in this case, the force is irresistible. And kung hindi nila in-employ yon, hindi ka papasok sa isang contract. So, violence, usually, sinaksak ka, binaril ka, just to enter into a contract, pinalipit yung kamay mo, sinuntok ka, binugbog ka, violence. So, remember the keyword, serious or irresistible force. What else? Also, please take note of intimidation or threat. So, intimidation is more internal. So, in intimidation, tinakot ka. So, no physical force, but there is, remember, moral coercion. So, in intimidation or threat, you have to remember the factors. So, I remember the keywords muna. Reasonable and well-grounded fear of an imminent or grave evil upon the person. Who else? Property of his spouse, descendants, or ascendants to give consent. So, remember in intimidation, tinakot ka. So, remember, reasonable and well-grounded fear. Hindi yung natakot ka na lang ng walang kadahi-dahilan. The fear must be reasonable. The fear must be well-grounded. And also, remember that the fear must be because of an evil which is imminent and grave, and the evil is on the person of the party who is forced to enter into the contract, or pwedeng yung evil na yan is upon his property, or pwede namang yung kanyang spouse, ascendants, or descendants. So, tinutukan ka ng barel. This is, remember, intimidation, because there is no serious and irresistible force. So, wala kasing physical force, walang moral coercion. walang physical force, but there is, remember, moral coercion. Anyway, dahil tinutukan ka ng baril, napilitan kang pumasok sa contract. What else? Also, kung tinakot ka niya na susunugin niya yung bahay mo, that is intimidation also, because there is an evil na i-inflict upon your property. Tinakot ka ng kausap mo na papatay niya yung asawa mo. So, that is an evil upon your spouse. How about your live-in partner? Remember, in case of live-in partner, the law applies as well. Or sometimes known as yung common law wife or husband, common law partner, yan. If you are cohabiting with a person who is not your spouse technically, but the law applies just the same. Anyway, your consent is vitiated just the same. Defective pa rin yung consent mo. What else? Also, the evil is upon your descendants, anak mo, or your ascendants, magulang mo. So, the consent is vitiated just the same. So, remember also that to determine the degree of intimidation, you have to consider the age, sex, and condition of the person who is enforcing the threat. So, kung 30 years old ka, very healthy, tapos merong isang matanda, 95 years old, tinatakot ka niya na papatayin ka niya, obviously, that cannot be considered as intimidation because you have to consider yung age noong nananakot sa'yo. And also, remember that yung person who is doing the intimidation, he must be in a position to carry out his threat. So, here, obviously, 95 years old, di ba? Ang bilis mo lang tumakbo, pwede na, wala ka ng problema. So, also, what else? I'm trying to, yes, threat to enforce just or legal claim. Tinakot ka niya, didemanda ka raw niya. Is that intimidation? No, because remember, may karapatan tayong mag-demanda. So, it is, remember, justified. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin tinakot ka if tinakot kang ididemanda ka. So, also, remember, in 1336, violence or intimidation may be employed by a third person. Iba ang nananakit sa'yo, hindi yung mismong kausap mo. But, again, consent is vitiated just the same. How about Article 1337, undue influence? So, remember, in undue influence, there is influence which will overpower the mind of one party and destroys free will. So, here, you are expressing already the will of another person. So, remember, para maging vitiated consent, ano nga ba yung vitiated consent? Defective consent. In case hanggang ngayon, hindi nyo pa rin nagigets yun. So, to make your consent vitiated, the influence must be, remember, undue or improper. So, yun ang kailangan nyo tandaan. Also, in undue influence, some factors which will be considered. Number one, confidential family, spiritual, and other relations. And also, mental weakness, yung mga madaling mauto, ignorance, mga hindi nakapag-aral, ganyan, and also financial distress. So, mas madaling ma-unduly influence yung mga persons in financial distress. So, that's what you have to remember about undue influence. When there is undue influence, there is vitiated or defective consent. What else? Also, fraud. In case of vices of consent, we refer to fraud here, yung causal fraud o dolo causante. Because there are actually two kinds of fraud or dolo. So, causal fraud, which is being talked about in this provision, or dolo causante, is fraud to induce another party to enter into the contract. Kung hindi ka niya niloko, hindi ka papayag na pumasok sa contract. So, remember, this fraud is before the contract, and the fraud is used as a means to induce or to make the other party enter into the contract. So, yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. How do you commit causal fraud through insidious words or machinations. Mabulaklak na salita. So remember, insidious words, machination, or pwede naman by concealment, because there is also fraud by concealment as provided for in 1339. So if there is an obligation to disclose facts pero hindi mo siya dinisclose, this is also fraud. Like an agent, meron siyang obligation to disclose facts to the principal. Pagka hindi niya dinisclose itong facts na to, this is fraud by concealment. So, let us say, yung agent sabi niya, may itong principal, may pinabentang lupa sa agent, tapos sabi ng agent, may bumibili, tapos mababa lang yung price. Pero hindi sinabi ng agent na meron pang ibang gustong bumili na mas mataas ang price. So, because of the failure of the agent to disclose yung information na there are other interested parties to the land or to the property, this is fraud by concealment. Had the principal known na ganito ang case, hindi dapat siya pumasok sa contract with the agent. Malamang kakontsaba niya yung bumibili ng mababang price. So remember, fraud may be committed by insidious words or machinations, and also there must be a misrepresentation here. And again, fraud must be material. Kung hindi ka niloko, hindi ka papasok sa contract. Yun ang kailangan nating tandaan. Also, take note of the other kind of fraud, yun namang incidental fraud or dolo incidente. Will only make the party liable for damages. So this is a fraud after the point that the parties already gave his consent. Unlike sa causante, causal fraud, it cost you to enter into the contract. In incidental fraud, nagkataon lang, it will only give an action, rise to an action for damages. Also, remember for fraud, yung mga usual exaggerations in trade, dealer stock, hindi siya fraud. Kasi, binibigyan ng right ang mga nagbebenta na mambola. Sort of, parang bumili ka ng mangga, matamis ba yan? Alam nga namang sabihin niyang maasim, di ba? Pero, anong sasabihin niya? Sobrang tamis. Mapupunta ka sa langit sa sobrang katamisan. Ikaw naman tong si Ewan, binili mo, tapos hindi ka naman pumunta sa langit dahil hindi naman masyadong matamis. Fraud ba ito? Not really. So, because they are, remember, sellers are allowed usual exaggerations in trade. Remember, it will stress the rule of caveat emptor or buyer beware. So, ikaw bumibili, kailangan maging aware ka dun sa nature ng binibili mo. So, caveat, C-A-V-E-A-T space E-M-P-T-O-R, caveat emptor. Also, expressions of opinions in 1341. Kung it turns out na mali yung opinion, it is not fraud. Maganda ba to? Sabi nung kapitbahay nyo, oh, maganda yan. So, hindi naman pala maganda. So, this is not fraud. But if the opinion is made by an expert, remember, it can also constitute fraud. So, here, the opinion of the expert is the only information relied upon noong tao na naloko. Remember, lalong-lalo na dahil siya ay expert, this is considered also fraud. In 1342, misrepresentation by a third person will not vitiate consent. 43, misrepresentation in good faith, not this is not fraud, but only error. What else? Also fraud, katulad na sinabi ko kanina, serious and should have not been employed by both of the contracting parties. So, what else? Simulation of contracts, articles 1345 to 1346. So, remember, simulation of contracts or faking contracts, process of intentionally deceiving yung others by producing the appearance of a contract when there is really no contract, or producing the appearance of a contract which is different from the real agreement. So based on the definition, you will know that two kinds of simulation. absolute simulation or otherwise known as your fictitious contracts. Here, remember, wala talagang kontrata. The parties, they do not intend to be bound at all. This is a void contract. Why is it void? Because there is no consent. Nakakita kayo ng blank piece of paper, you want to try out a ballpen. Ito, try natin itong ballpen na ito kung tumitinta. Nag-draft kayo ng deed of sale. Although, hindi naman binibenta talaga yung, let us say, kotse. Hindi naman talaga binibenta. So here, remember that this is an absolutely simulated contract. The parties there, they do not want to be bound by the contract of sale, but instead, they just want to try out a ballpen. This is void for lack of consent. Also, based on the definition, also, you will know that the second kind is your relatively simulated contract. So, otherwise known as your disguised contracts. Merong contract na nakadraft, which is different from the real agreement. Let us say, ang draft yung contract is a contract of sale, but really, what happened is a contract of, it's a donation. So, dinonate ng nanay mo yung lupa niya sa'yo, pero pinalabas niya na it is a sale. So, remember, parties here, they hide the true agreement. So, what else? What is binding? Is it the real agreement? Remember, or the fake agreement, yung nakadraft na instrument? Parties are bound by the real agreement, subject to exceptions. If the real agreement will prejudice a third person, in which case yung fake agreement yung magiging binding, and also if the purpose is contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. Again, lamog PP. LA, MOG, PNP, public order and public policy. So anyway, let's continue with objects. So in objects, remember, covered by 1347 to 1349. Remember, subject matter of the contract. So kung subject matter siya, it can be a service, it can also be a thing. So yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. Also, not mentioned there, but pwede rin ang right. Ito pala, naka-mention pala. So, it can also be an object of contract. So, for things, remember, these are the requisites. Number 1, it is within the commerce of men. So, it can be subject of legal transactions. So, hindi pwedeng yung mga sidewalk. Bakit? Government property. Hangin, pwede mo bang ibenta? Hindi rin pwede. Because, again, public properties. Tulay, hindi pwede. Drugs, hindi rin pwede because they are illegal. What else? Not impossible, legally or physically. Also, drugs, hindi pwede. Legally impossible. Physically, yung object like itlog ng tandang. So, physically impossible as an object. What else? Object must also exist, or if it is not yet existing, pwede rin naman yung objects which are capable of existence. So, bunga ng mangga. So, not yet existing, but capable of existence. Future things. What else? How about future inheritance? Pwede bang maging subject ng contract of sale or whatever contract? Usually, class, in future inheritance, hindi pwede. Because, remember, hindi pa naman sa'yo yan. So, it cannot be, as a general rule, be the subject of contracts. But there are exceptions, which you will find in your book in case of donations propter nuptias or donations by reason of marriage, and in case of partitions of property during the lifetime of property owner. So, yun ang dalawang klaseng exception. So, remember, future things, pwede. Future inheritance, hindi pwede as a general rule. Only 2 exceptions. What else? Object is also determinate. If it is not yet determinate, it is capable of being made determinable without the need for a new agreement between the parties. Isang basket ng itlog, di mo alam kung ilang itlog, not determinate yet, but bilangin mo, it is, remember, determinable. How about services as objects of contract, the service must be within the commerce of men. So, this is not an illegal service like killing somebody, prostituting, etc., etc. What else? The service must not be impossible. Magbuhat ng barko, magbuhat ng eroplano, physically impossible service. Pumatay ng tao, also legally impossible service. And the service must be determinate or at least capable of being made determinate in the future. Rights naman may be also objects of the contract except if the rights is intransmissible. So, ano yung mga intransmissible rights? Political rights, right to vote, public office, etc. They are not transmissible rights. That's why they cannot be the subject of contracts. Yan. So, cause, the last topic for today. Cause or consideration or causa. Again, remember your Latin terms. So, cause is essential reason or compelling reason why the parties will enter into a contract. So, there are 3 classifications of cause. Number 1, onerous cause. Number 2, remuneratory cause. And number 3, gratuitous cause. Remember, in onerous cause, yung consideration dyan is the prestation or promise of a thing. So, the parties are reciprocally obligated to one another. An example of an onerous contract, again, is the contract of sale. So, in a contract of sale, for the seller, the reason why he will enter into the contract is so that he will receive money. And in case of the buyer, so he will receive the object. So, that is one theory. Also, what else? In case of remunerative, but in onerous, remember, merong promise yung isa. That's why you want to enter into contract. What else? In remuneratory or remunerative, remember here the cost is past service or benefit, which is a recoverable debt. So, here, ang binabayaran mo is yung past service. But else, in gratuitous contracts, ang consideration dito, kasi nga gratuitous siya, is the liberality of the benefactor or giver. So, what is an example of a gratuitous contract? A donation is a gratuitous contract. So, sa gratuitous contract, remember, ikaw ay nagbibigay. So, donation is a gratuitous contract. So, in a donation, pagka nagbigay ka, wala ka namang natanggap, di ba? Pero the cost, the reason why you enter into a donation is the liberality or generosity of the giver. So, remember, gratuitous contracts. What else? Also, please take note of motive and also vis-a-vis cause. So, ang motive is the personal or private reason why a party will enter into a contract. So, ang motive, remember, it does not affect yung contract. In case of illegal motive, the contract is valid. In case of an illegal cause, the contract is void. So, remember, in cause, example na lang, buyer will buy a knife from the seller. So, para sa buyer, the object is for him yung kanyang pera. What is the cost? Yung knife ng seller. So, ano ang motive? Bakit bumibili ang buyer ng knife? Because the buyer wants to kill his neighbor. So, here, the cost is valid. Bakit? Ano ba yung cost for the buyer? The cost for the buyer is the knife. Wala namang illegal sa knife, di ba? But here, the motive is illegal. Yan. Bakit? Kasi gusto niyang patayin yung kapitbahay niya. Now, question, is the contract between the seller and the buyer void contract? Before that, also for the seller, remember that the cost is the money of the buyer. The object for him is the knife which he already owns. But remember, class, here that the motive, even of the buyer, even if illegal, will not invalidate the contract of sale between seller and buyer. So yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. So try to distinguish cause, immediate, direct reason, etc. And very important here, illegality affects the validity of the contract in case of cause, and in motive, illegality will not render the contract void. What else? Also, lesion in Article 1355. But before we go there, also remember 1352. Contracts without cause are void contracts. It will produce no effect. So remember, if your cause is illegal, your contract is also void. So anong ibig sabihin yan? Pakasalan mo ko because promise of marriage based on sexual intercourse. O yan. So remember here, papakasalan dahil merong promise na pakasalan dahil nga because of sexual intercourse. Remember, class, this is an illegal cause. So the contract there is valid. So ang cause, remember, it must be present. If there is no cause for the contract, remember, it is a void contract. And also, in case of contracts, it's also always presumed to exist. Now, what about if the cost is inadequate? Like in a contract of sale, yan. Ang bayad ay kulang. There is actually lesion. But remember, it will not affect contract. What else? If the cost, there is failure, remember also that the contract is valid. Nagkaroon lang ng failure. At the time na nag-contract, merong cost. Pero later on, the cost, nagkaroon ng failure, hindi siya lumitaw. Let us say, hindi siya nabayaran, ganun. So, here, remember, it does not actually invalidate a contract, but will give rise to an action to ask for payment. Yan. What else? Also, 1354, cause is always presumed. 1355, let's go back to that. Lesion, katulad nga ng sinabi ko, lesion is price is unjust or cost is inadequate. So, hindi mo natatanggap yung full equivalent of what you gave in a contract. So, remember, lesion as a general rule will not invalidate a contract. Yan, kailangan yung tandaan. Does not invalidate a contract. Kahit mababa ang presyo. Kasi, syempre, hindi naman tayo pwedeng i-protect ng law every time sa mga bad bargains natin. So, yun ang kailangan yung tandaan. Also, the exceptions are, number 1, when in addition to lesion, there is also fraud or undue influence or mistake. So, kaya siguro sobrang baba ng presyo kasi nagkamali sila sa binebenta. Akala nila fake na kwintas, hindi tunay na gold, tapos yung pala ay tunay na gold. That's why mababa ang presyo. Later on, they found out that it is real gold. So, lesion here will affect yung contract because there is mistake, fraud, or undue influence. What else? In cases expressly provided by law, that is 1381 paragraph 1, 1381 paragraph 2. Yun ang mga relevant sa inyo. We will discuss that later on when we go to chapter 6. So anyway, later on, we will begin our lecture. I will record a lecture on chapter 6. But for now, this is the only lecture that I can manage to record. Anyway, I will see the class tomorrow.